Madam President.
Senator from Indiana.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to speak to the chamber here for not to exceed 20 minutes.
Without objection.
I don't anticipate taking 20 minutes of time. I hope to be back on the floor this afternoon talking about a related subject, but I do want to take the opportunity essentially to bring us back to what the central problem that we're facing is in this chamber and in this country. And that is dealing with an out-of-control spending program in Washington, D.C. that has occurred over many, many years. In fact, the accumulation of debt not only is at the government level, but it's been at the state level, it's been at the local level, it's been at the personal and the private level. We have been in a cycle of debt accumulation, which simply is coming to an end. And it's coming to an end because we no longer can afford to pay the interest and no longer can afford to fulfill the promises that have been made on a political basis to people over a whole series of years, both by Democrats and Republicans, and only accelerated in a dramatic fashion in the last 3 years, where we have seen an explosion of spending at the federal level that simply cannot continue and be paid for under any system of taxation at all. And so what we've seen here is a nice deflection away from the central issue, a deflection into, well, the whole thing comes down to whether or not we tax millionaires and billionaires. And the President's speech last week, which set the stage for all this discussion, is a nice deflection away from what we all know that we need to do. And what we need to do is address this out-of-control deficit, out-of-control accumulation of debt that is simply unsustainable. Now, it's pure arithmetic, and it's easy arithmetic. When you spend $3.7 trillion a year and your revenues coming in are only $2.2 trillion a year, you are racking up on a year-by-year basis a $1.5 or greater trillion a year deficit. And that deficit has to be paid. And how is it paid? Well, 40 cents of every dollar that is spent has to be borrowed in order to pay the promises that have been made. And so until we as a body put aside this gotcha stuff that may be politically positioning for the 2012 election, but doesn't address the real problem, we're not going to solve that problem. There's been a lot of posturing going on, and I'm not here to address that in specific detail at this particular point of time, except to say that we have to refocus on the real task before us. And the real task before us is understood by the American people. They understand that we cannot continue spending money at the rate that we are spending it. Our debt has skyrocketed 35% to a limit of $14.3 trillion in just the last 2 years. Our annual deficit, our yearly deficit now is 3 times greater than the highest deficit of the previous administration. And today, as a result of a stagnant economy and as a result of uncertainty imposed within our economic system, we have 14 million Americans out of work, and that number is conservative because those are the ones that are looking for work. Those are the ones that have given up. Those that have given up amount to a significant number, and those that may never have an opportunity to get back in the workforce ought to be of great concern to us. These facts, combined with the warnings that have been given to us by the financial markets, should make it clear to all of us, from the President to members of Congress and both parties and to the American people, that this current plan that we are operating under, the President's economic plan, is not working. That the plan of spending more and borrowing more is not getting our economy back to where it ought to be and not getting people back to work. Over the weekend, I was privileged to be able to give a Republican address following the President's address to the nation, his weekly address. And then in that, I suggested that instead of the current proposal and plans that we are operating under this presidency, we ought to look to models that are actually functioning much better and working and see what we can learn from that. And representing the state of Indiana, I'm proud to be able to say that The model that our state has used is taken our state from a deficit position to a surplus position without raising taxes by reducing spending and actually cutting taxes and balancing our budget. We have now seen a significant change in the financial fortune of the state of Indiana and Hoosiers that occupy that state. This administration has increased spending, increased borrowing, raised taxes, and expanded the growth of government. And now the credit agencies are looking at our federal government and warning of dire consequences and downgrading of our debt. At the same time, the model used in my state of Indiana, which cut taxes, cut spending, and balanced our budget, has now awarded us with a AAA credit rating, the best rating that you can get. Now, the president's plan during this time, the only one that we can work off of is his submitted $4 trillion budget, which would have increased deficit spending, not decreased it. Interestingly enough, the only plan that we have in front of us, comprehensive plan at this point in time from the president or his party, is the plan the president introduced. We've had some nice speeches and we've had some nice rhetoric. We've heard about the dire consequences of not coming up with a sensible plan before we hit the debt limit ceiling, now scheduled for August 2nd. But the only concrete plan proposed to us here in this chamber and in the House of Representatives from the opposition is a $4 trillion budget, which was voted on here in the Senate and was defeated by a unanimous vote. Not one Democrat voted for the president's budget plan, yet no alternate plan has been proposed. Now, there may be one in the works. We would like to see it. We would like to work off it. I don't understand how you can negotiate any kind of a final proposal if you don't have something to work with that the other side has proposed. And the only thing we now have before us is simply a resolution on the matter of whether or not we ought to tax millionaires and billionaires. Even if we went forward and did that, even if we took 100% of all of the income earned by all of those who are in the billionaire category, it would be a drop in the bucket compared to what we need to do. It would do nothing to adjust and reform spending programs and duplication of spending and bureaucratic overlap here in Washington that has been accumulating for year after year after year. And so it's a nice diversion. It's a nice way of playing class warfare. It's a nice way maybe of setting yourself up for some good talking points back home. It's a nice way of positioning yourself for some good rhetoric back home if you're talking about running for re-election. But it doesn't address the problem that we have. And so here we are, having canceled our July 4th recess in order to discuss the budget and discuss the plight that we're in and try to come together and fashion a plan that we can assure the American people will put us on a much sounder fiscal path and will calm the financial markets and the rating agencies and will reassure those who invest their money in America from all over the world that we finally have gotten our hands around the problem and we're coming up with sensible solutions. And America will continue to be a safe place to invest your money, and the dollar will continue to be a sound currency for the world to put their confidence in. I was encouraged by the president's statement recently that we ought to move forward. As you know, last week the president's hopefully remarks on the budget were simply perhaps to satisfy his base or to politically position themselves for more serious negotiations. I hope that's the case. But it's important that the president has indicated, I believe, that we must take bold steps. We must take them now in anticipation of what needs to be done by August 2nd, that he has called for a summit tomorrow. It's time that we put aside the political rhetoric, the gamesmanship. It's time that we got down to some serious bargaining and negotiating and coming up with what I think most of us believe is necessary in order to accomplish what we need to in addressing this very serious problem that has very serious consequences. There is agreement, I trust, that we need serious spending reductions. Some have estimated it in the $2 trillion range over a 10-year period of time. Others to say to get at the problem and really credibly address it, it needs to be double that or more, in the $4 to $5 trillion range. There needs to be a commitment to restructure entitlement programs. We all understand and know that the three major entitlement programs of Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security, and especially Medicare, are running out of money, are not sustainable under the current program, and there needs to be restructuring. Now, once again, this is something that is ripe for political positioning and posturing. The fact of the matter is that unless we address structural changes in the entitlement programs, those programs will be drastically reduced, if not eliminated, in the future, because they are simply not sustainable given the current amount of recipients drawing benefits as opposed to the money that is going into those programs. And so anyone who says we're doing this on the backs of senior citizens on low income are not realistically acknowledging the facts of the matter and that these programs are going broke. So those that are standing up, and there are some on both sides of the aisle, those that are standing up and saying this has to be part of our solution to our spending and deficit problem, if they are saying that this is not part of the solution, they simply are telling seniors, we're going to allow your program to go broke, or there are going to be severe consequences. Those that are advocating this, to the contrary, are basically saying we're trying to save those programs. We're trying to ensure benefits for the future, needed health care benefits under Medicare, and needed benefits under Medicaid, and needed income under Social Security that people are depending on. We're trying to save those programs and keep those programs solvent so that a few years from now, as the trustees have indicated in their latest report on Medicare, in a few years from now, we will not run into a much more serious problem which will require much more drastic action. Also, what we need to do is ensure that we have enforcement programs in so that whatever programs, cuts and reductions and changes are made and reforms are made are not overturned by a future Congress. Enforcement programs to do what we are really obligated to do on this floor, but don't seem to often have the political will to address effectively. Programs that will automatically kick in to ensure that the goals that we have established will be reached, whether or not we have the political will to go forward and do it ourselves. Yes, I do support a balanced budget. If we had had that balanced budget passed in the mid-90s when we had 2 attempts and it failed by 1 vote each time, we would not find ourselves in this position now. We would have done what states across America have had to do, and that is go be straight out with their constituents and simply say, yes, you can have this new program. Yes, we can expand spending here. But constitutionally, we are mandated to balance our budget, and so we have 2 options of getting there. We can either reduce spending in other areas if this is more important and has a higher priority and use that money to pay for it, or we can raise your taxes. Now let's decide which you want to do. Is this program of such necessity and has the majority support in the state or the locality, and the public is willing to support it with increased taxes, not unlike the school referendums where the school puts forward a plan to improve the facilities or hire new teachers and puts a referendum before the people of the school district and say, if you're willing to raise your property taxes, we can do this with education. Sometimes they're passed, sometimes they fail. But it gives the public the opportunity to determine whether or not they'll pay for it. And it leaves the ultimate financial position at a level of balance. And so we should address that. there's a dispute or a difference of opinion between just what the components of a balanced budget should be, we should have that debate. We should go forward with that. We should work towards some sensible solution. But the only way we're going to guarantee the American people that we're not going to return to our prolific ways is to establish and enact and give to the states the opportunity to enact a constitutional amendment to balance the budget for future spending. And finally, I want to include the need for comprehensive tax reform. As you know, as many know, in the chamber here, Senator Wyden and I, on a bipartisan basis, have introduced comprehensive tax reform. We're going to talk about that a little bit later this afternoon. We've essentially said that the tax code is dysfunctional. It does not promote growth and efficiency. It needs to be reformed. There's general consensus on that. We have proposed a way to do it. We're open to suggestions of better ways if someone else has better ideas. We do believe that a lot of the subsidies and tax exclusions and expenditures in the tax code are unfair. They're put in for the benefit of a few and not the many. That part needs to be reformed. There's a very interesting editorial this morning in the Wall Street Journal talking about the ability to broaden the tax base by eliminating many of these exclusions, but in return lowering the rates, whether they be individual or corporate rates, that would give us the opportunity to promote growth, which is an essential part of our reaching fiscal balance and fiscal sanity. The time is now. The time is not after the 2012 election. The dire situation which we find ourselves in is being watched worldwide by financial markets, by all of those who lend us money. They want to know what the financial future of the United States is going to be. They want to know whether or not we have the will and the commitment to address our very serious political situation, financial situation, and the political situation that goes along with it. Are we willing to rise above the political and do what is appropriate and necessary for this country? So when the president said, right now we've got a unique opportunity to do something big, I couldn't agree with that statement more. And I'm glad that the president has finally come on board and said, let's get engaged together and negotiate something big, something that will solve the problem. Now is the time for us and the unique opportunity for the president to lead. But frankly, we need more than rhetoric. We need specifics. And we need to put it on the table. We need more than some kind of rant against those who fly in corporate jets, as if that's going to, that subsidy, which is a depreciation issue in the tax code and actually passed by a Democrat Congress, is going to solve the problem. Or whether we're going to impose a higher tax on billionaires and millionaires, and even if those taxes went up to 100%, it's a drop in the bucket. This is not a responsible way to go forward and negotiate what we need to negotiate. So let's do it. The American people understand it. They voted at the polls in November of 2010 in a way that should send a signal here that we understand what's going on, and we want to send people to Washington that will address this very problem. And as this thing is cascaded into 2011, and we've dithered and pushed off and rethought through what the schedule is, American people are getting increasingly frustrated over our inability to come to terms with this current situation that we face. So now is the time. Now is the time to put politics secondary to what is right for America and what is right for Americans. And we have that opportunity, a unique opportunity. And in one sense, it's good that we are running up against this debt limit crisis, because it is forcing us to stop pushing this thing down the road, to stop delaying and waiting until after the next election. It is forcing us to take action now. And so we've got about 4 weeks here to do what is right for the American people, but more importantly, what is right for the future of America, our children and grandchildren and generations to come. If we're going to be that generation that saddles them with debt which they can't climb out of, and they aren't able to live the simple American dream of raising a family, owning a home, or a place to live, providing for the education of their children and participating in the wonderful experience that this country has had through sacrifice and commitment and dedication over all these years. If we're turning that over to our children and with that broken dream and broken promise, we have not done our job. So we're here to do it now. The time is now. Let's have the political will to do it. Let's subordinate our political considerations for 2012, do what's right, and then we will have left a legacy, win, lose, or draw politically, a legacy that's important for this country. Madam President, I yield, if I have any time left, the balance of that time.
The senator has consumed his 20 minutes.